Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. For those of you that might be new to this format, every other broadcast, we have a live Q&A. So what I do is I take questions that are sent in between the broadcast. You can always send in questions, suggestions, requests to webinar@evoketherapy.com. So we take those first, and then I'll take any live questions that come in the order that they're received. So if you have a question, you're attending live, submit them at any time. Livy, who is producing for me this evening, she'll pass those on to me when there's time in the broadcast. Before I get into the first question, I just want to remind you of the upcoming Conscious Parenting Seminar, September 29th, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time with a break for lunch. This is a relatively small group setting where I host for the whole day. So we have education in the morning, education in the afternoon, breakout sessions, and most importantly, it's kept small enough so that we can take your live questions and work through some of your situations, some of your scenarios. So we do that on purpose. It's $400 per person, $700 for a couple if you share a screen. That's just so that there's enough space for everybody to have the opportunity to ask questions and to participate. All right, folks. So let me get into the first pre-submitted question. Somebody says, what if you're trying to ensure your child gets what you didn't get from your parents? Well, I think that's probably the most consistent parental desire that there is. And it's oftentimes on that road, away from what your parents did or didn't do, that you find yourself again. You kind of circle around. The best example is this. Let me give you the best example. It's a real example in our family. I'll use my wife for an example in this, and she hopefully won't mind me doing it. I use her for an example all the time. But if you don't feel heard growing up, if you don't feel listened to and seen growing up, and then you have children and you want them to feel heard and seen and valued, what can happen in those instances, and what my wife would tell you, is it's so easy to overcompensate. It's so easy not just to listen adequately, because you have no model for that. All you know is that you weren't heard, that you weren't seen, and you don't want to do that. You want to correct that, repair that. So you try to do its opposite, but it's not quite the opposite. And so what that can look like, and it happens for almost every parent that I talk to, is they end up not listening too much. That's not the right way to say it, but they end up giving too much. For example, trying to make a child feel happy when a boundary is set. That's how it gets twisted in your mind. You convince the child, or you discuss with the child long enough that you want them to come around to your way of thinking. Because if the child isn't happy or isn't content, it reminds you of how you felt when you were their age, and in the long run, you still don't hear and see them. You're trying to fix something that happened to you, and because you have no training, you don't repair it. You just do a version of its opposite. You just do the other side of the same coin, as they say. So very, very often, that attempt to not do what parents did will end up in a different way being exactly what happened to you when you were growing up. So if a child says, I don't want to eat my peas or my chicken for dinner, whatever the story is, and of course that's a trite example, and you have this wound of not being heard and your feelings not being attuned to as a child, then you might give in or capitulate or give the child too much of a vote, if you will, in the things that are going on in the house, and they have to like it and agree with it, and you get into this trap where the only way that you think that they're going to feel heard is if they're happy, like I said earlier. And so it ends up being the same problem. So it's not a bad starting point. Virtually all parents start at that point. Not all, but virtually all of them start at that point. But something has to happen different. You have to heal. You have to unravel it all. And you have to learn a new model. I was just explaining to somebody today that was calling me to match up with one of our coaches. And I was explaining to them that when you're talking to somebody and you express unpleasant feelings. You'll start to see, if you have a good therapist, you'll start to see what an adult looks like when they do that, what a healed or mature person looks like when they get angry or upset or disagreeable feelings shared with them. And then after a while if you have enough courage to tell your therapist how you feel, in fact, I know at least one person on here knows what I'm talking about because we've talked about this. If you have the courage to tell your therapist how they feel, and if they listen well, all of a sudden you have this incredible awakening, and you realize that virtually nobody around, nobody in life is doing a good job of listening, of really deeply, empathically listening. And then you start to take that experience with this new parent, if you will, right? The therapist becomes the parent that you never had, and therapy becomes the childhood that you never had. And you start to realize that people's reactions to you are about them and not about you, because you have for the first time now with your therapist, you have a model of a healthy relationship with healthy attunement. So your question is common and great, and virtually everybody comes into parenting with that desire. But the problem with not doing it the way that our parents did it is that it doesn't tell us what to do. We have no model. That's why I talk about so often, and it sounds like I'm just using words, but I mean it, that we're really trying to teach your children how to be human. We're trying to teach you how to be human. I'm trying to model being human. I'm trying to be human. I'm trying to learn how to be human. And what that means is imperfect, fallible, irrational at times, triggered at times, sometimes wise, sometimes unwise, so forth and so on. So yeah, there's a saying, I'm trying to recall it. I'm not getting it perfectly, but it's something like that when we run away from our past, we run into it. Something like that. It's said much more poetically like that by some great thinker. But that's in essence the risk of trying not to do it the way that your parents did, or trying not to make the same mistakes your parents have, is the likelihood of you running into, at a fundamental level, the same issue is very, very likely, almost inevitable, unless you get help, unless you get new training, unless you have a new experience with somebody different. But just an aversion to the old feelings of childhood, the old behaviors, the old patterns in childhood, that's not quite enough to get the job done. Great question. Thank you for it. Somebody writes this question. My daughter's been at Evoke for 5 weeks. Last week we spoke to her over the phone for the first time since arriving. She sounded hopeful and proud that she was now a mentor. Today's conversation was different. It was more about asking if she can leave with us when we visit her in a couple of weeks. She also kept asking that we stop listening to other people about what's good for her. My concern is that she works on us to leave early during our visit. What are your thoughts on how to respond over the phone and in person? I'm so glad that you asked this. First of all, there's an entire broadcast on the visit to the field. I would recommend that you listen to that ahead of time. And I'll try to hit a couple of highlights that are related to the question that you've asked from that broadcast. But please watch that broadcast or listen to that broadcast on the podcast app. Number one, come to the visit with your relapse and regression in mind. In other words, come watching for your triggers, for your old behaviors, for your old capitulations. I used to always say to the children in the field, so you want your parents to stop listening to everybody but you. Right? That's your request. And I say to them, so you're critical of your parents, first of all. They're not as good as they could be. That's one of your complaints. But you don't want them to learn from a parent, coach, or a teacher, or a therapist anything different. And really what she's doing, and I have empathy for her, I'm not picking on her in the least, is she's afraid of losing her power, right? If you get supported from somebody else. I remember this with my mother and my therapist, our family therapist growing up. I remember explicitly realizing that the more that my therapist talked to my mother, the less my old ways of manipulating would have their effect. Very, very clearly. I was conscious of it. I was sure to say things in private. In fact, at one point while I was in treatment, and there was just a break, we were just going from the meeting room to another part of the program. And on that short walk, I asked my mother if she would let me leave, and that every time that I wouldn't do what the staff asked, they would threaten to send me to a higher level of care. And I had my mother in that short period of time. I put pressure on her to give me an answer, and she said she wouldn't send me to a higher level of care. The next morning, when it was time to wake up, I didn't get out of bed, and I was home by the end of the day. So I kind of know what it's like to be the kid in this story. I kind of know how it works. What I would say to a parent now, being an adult, I would say, listen to everybody. Listen to me, listen to the therapist, and figure out what you need to figure out for yourself. Find the truth, find your center, your source. Find your authentic self in this process. The quicker you do, the better for all of us. That's what I would say to a parent. If in my mature adult wise self, that's what I would say. So it's just not uncommon. She's smart, she's savvy, she's wise. And I would say the same thing to you that I just said, that I would say to parent. Listen to everybody. Try everything on for size. See what fits. Come ready to observe. The visit, it's 10% celebration, which will happen no matter what. And it's 90% work. And by work, I mean, watch her and see where she's at. Right? And then see where you're at in response. That's the gold. That's the precious part of this, is you get to practice maintaining your integrity, maintaining your authenticity, your commitment to yourself in this process. And then that's why, a lot of parents, if I say come looking for progress, they're thinking about the child. But very, very clearly, I want to be very, very clear to say it's not about the child and their progress when you come. It's about you and your progress for you. Now, if I were talking to them, I would say the exact same thing to them. I would say, don't worry about your parents and how far they've come or what work they've done. Focus on what you've done in this process. So, and know that it's going to be hard. Know that it's going to be painful. Know that you're going to be put to the test. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. The reason, we were the first wilderness program to bring parents out in the middle of the program. That did not happen before we started our program anywhere. Everybody was back before we started our program in 1998. Back before we started, everybody kept everybody at arm's length. And for the duration of the treatment process, things went rather smoothly. When we opened our doors in the summer of 1998, we started bringing parents out midway through the program, sometimes even earlier, from the first client that we saw. And in some ways, it caused more work. We had to work at it. We didn't have this buffer of space and time, right? Through letters. We had to deal with the patterns, the dynamics in real time. But what we saw and what we were committed to is we think that dealing with the issue in real time is more effective than dealing with it theoretically or historically. So we put parents and children together, not when the child is fixed and done, fully baked and ready to serve, if you will, but we bring you together when you still have weaknesses, when you still have triggers, when you still have vulnerabilities, when you still have reactions to each other. What I would say is, don't make a decision in the spur of the moment. That's not good. No matter. I was just telling somebody this today. It had nothing to do with a child in the wilderness. I was saying, don't make a decision when you're upregulated. Don't make a decision if your prefrontal cortex is offline. Don't make a decision when you're having a trauma response or when you're grieving or when you're angry. My therapist said to me many years ago, Learn to strike when the iron is cold, meaning wait until the person is regulated. Wait until you are regulated. So if you start feeling upregulated, see what it looks like when your child is ready to come home. I'll tell one story before I get off this question. I had a father visiting his son, and the parents visited. They were decent co-parents, really decent co-parents, but they weren't married, and they decided to come in back-to-back weeks. So this was the week that the father was there. And during part of this day, the parent and the child are off by themselves. We want you to have enough time to experiment without the therapist hovering. So when it was time to have the session, the father brought up that his son kind of laid into him, really applied the heat, the old ways of manipulating. And the father looked at us and was saying, I thought we were past this. From the letters and even the phone calls, it seemed like he had accepted that he was going to be here, and in this case, with his family, that he was going to go on to a school afterwards. And the father was forlorn and sad and looked at us like, guys, I thought you got farther than this. And the son was feeling ashamed and confused. And I offered something. I said, Dad, can I speak for you what I think you might be feeling right now? Tell me what I get wrong in this. And the dad said, sure, of course, he trusted me. And I said, and I spoke to the son as if I was the father. And I said, look, I have my doubts about having you here every night, every day. I have my doubts and suspicions about bringing you home all the time. And I would love for you not to ask me to come home because that would be easier for me. But I realized that's not your job. Your job is to ask. Your job is to want it. And my job is to figure out where my boundary is. But what I can't do anymore is I can't have this battle like we used to have when you were home. That when I set a boundary, that we engage in this negotiation, this manipulation, this back and forth, this pressure. I can't go back to that anymore. And I won't go back to that. And I was looking at the son while I was talking, as if I was the father. And I glanced over at the father, and tears were streaming down his face. He was resonating with it. You don't know. You don't know if you're doing the right thing or not. You could be overreacting. You could be underreacting. You don't know. And that's why we spend so much time encouraging you to do your work, because that's the most important thing. The most important thing for your child is your work on you that you can do. Figuring yourself out, healing your trauma, learning new ways of communicating, engaging, learning what it means to be human, learning what it means to be accountable, killing your ego, not parenting from a place of ego. In other words, not parenting from a place of, I want to be a good father, I want to be a good mother, I want to be a good parent. But parenting from a place of curiosity and courage and love, not from a place of fear and guilt and insecurity. And it takes time to do that. So watch the broadcast or listen to the broadcast that I did on the parent visit and come ready to work. If you come ready to celebrate, and I make this point throughout the broadcast, you're going to walk away disappointed, most likely. And you're going to avoid talking about or starting difficult conversations because you won't want to ruin the visit. But if you come ready to learn and see what there is for you to learn, you'll probably walk away pretty satisfied, pretty fulfilled. I just saw an interview I was a huge Kobe Bryant fan for many years. My whole family was. And I just saw an interview that I'd never seen of him. And the interviewer was asking him, she was saying, some players are driven to win. And some players are driven not to lose. Which are you? And Kobe said, neither. I'm driven to learn. And when I'm driven to learn, then anything that happens is to my benefit in the game. If I make a mistake, it's to my benefit. If I succeed, it's to my benefit. And I've taken back control of the situation, because when I look at it from what can I learn, then that's within my power. So I would say come ready to learn. Learn about yourself, learn about your child, and learn about your dynamics, and you'll probably walk away satisfied. Those are my thoughts. Somebody says, you say if parents are struggling, it's their wound. If a child is struggling, it's their wound. Are you suggesting that parents cannot be struggling simply because they do not want to see their child in pain? Why? Why as a parent do I have to be wounded in order to be struggling when I see my child in pain? Isn't that called empathy? I must have misspoke. That's not at all what I mean. Let me go back to the beginning with this question. Great question. And I'm glad that you asked it, especially if I misspoke. Number one, I have 4 children. And when my children experience pain or setback or disappointment or hurt, I feel grief and pain with them. I experience what I call empathic misery. And there's a difference between that and losing my grounding and losing my resolve and losing my wisdom, becoming reactive to it. It's a matter probably of degrees, although I might argue it's different qualitatively. What I was trying to say, and I probably didn't say it as well as I could have, what I was trying to say is that the things that knock us off our center, the things that confuse us, that make us unclear, the things where that cause us to capitulate. When we lose our perspective in a very important moment, like this program is, when we lose our perspective at what's most important, we are responding to our history, to our wounds, to our own attachment fractures, and our own attachment trauma. So it's no, yes, you will feel pain. Yes, it will be sad. I mean, you're not human if you don't feel sadness and pain when your child struggles. It's the difference between feeling sadness and pain and the pain and the sadness having you. That's really what it is. One takes over, one gets in the driver's seat and starts driving things, and one is sitting next to you in the passenger seat. So maybe it is a matter of degrees, but no, it's not that when we feel our empathic misery that we are feeling our woundedness, that we are feeling our trauma response. It's more about kind of how we deal with that, how we cope with it, how we make sense out of it. So many parents over the years in a session with me, on a parenting session, can get very, very clear about what they want, what their value is in a specific situation, and what their decision is. They'll hang up the phone or get off the Zoom call with a clear and confident and courageous resolve. And then I'll get a phone call later, or the next day, or the next week, or an email or a text. And they'll say to me, well, she said something that I wasn't expecting, or she brought up this point, or he said this or that, or they said this or that. And then I was lost again. And that's very normal. That just shows you the gaps in your work, right? That just shows you you're human. We all do that. I do that. Everybody does that. So we work to know ourselves. We work to stay in relationship to ourselves. We work to honor our values as parents, our values as a spouse, our values as people. And if we are so empathic, some people call it, some people refer to themselves or others as empaths. I don't. If we were raised to believe that what somebody else thought about us or felt about us, especially if it was unpleasant, is intolerable, or something we have to capitulate or respond to by changing our decision, that starts to get into the wounding, see? That starts to look like our history being revealed to us. But feeling feelings, feeling the pain that we feel when our children are struggling, that's human. I would argue that not feeling pain, not feeling sadness, not struggling is probably a bigger trauma response than anything. It means you've numbed yourself. All right, thank you for that. Somebody writes, my question is about how to respond to a young adult who is asking for advice and help. I am in recovery for codependence. My young adult child and I have transformed our relationship from one resistance and control, respectively, to one of safety and love. Our communication has changed from emotional escalation and reaction to each other to emotional de-escalation. She has nonverbal learning disorder, and I find that she borrows from my ability to regulate my response to her dilemma. Part 2. My child is currently involved in an abusive, life-threatening relationship and has come to me for support. I find myself in this specific situation telling her what to do when she asks. She has self-awareness that the relationship is toxic and dangerous, but I believe she doesn't have the ego strength to separate from him on her own and needs my support to stay safe. When I do sense resistance, I back off and empathize with how difficult this is for her. But when she holds up the phone and asks, should I answer? When he is calling her, I say no without hesitation. Earlier the same day, she asked if she should buy something in the store even though she is strapped for cash. In that specific situation, I told her it was her decision. In processing this with my therapist, she talked about the difference between a threat from within and a threat from without. What are your thoughts? Well, isn't that a question? That is such a well thought out question that I just don't like it because it's so hard to answer, which really means I respect it. I want to say this to you all to make this clear. I think sometimes because I teach so much, it doesn't happen as much as it used to, but it happens still sometimes. I think sometimes what gets communicated, maybe the way that I'm saying it, maybe the way that others are hearing it, maybe a combination of both. I'm happy to have it be part of my responsibility. I think that the focus gets very specific on getting it right and being perfect at it. What you just described sounds very human. I have an aversion to intrusion from my own childhood. That's something I can see from a mile away. I can see intrusiveness. Because of my aversion to intrusiveness, I'm going to place a lot of emphasis on individuation, on differentiation, on an individual developing their own identity, which it sounds like you've done a lot of work around, both as a parent and as a person. But there are moments, especially when it comes to safety, like your therapist is saying, where somebody asks me a question and I'll get very simple and binary with them and say yes or no. It's not a perfect example, but I could talk about parenting a child with love and compassion and natural and logical consequences. And then if a child is running out to the street, screaming at them and tackling them is justifiable, right? Because the consequences are too dire. Then what I like about your question is the part where you said this, the part where you said, where you talk about when I sense resistance, I back off. And then I empathize with how difficult it is for her. I think you're doing a great job. And I don't think saying don't answer it is overstepping. In the long run, it doesn't solve anything, right? What it does is it keeps her safe in that moment. In the long run, she's got to figure it out. And that's what you know. You know that saying no hasn't fixed the problem. I think that's the key. It's good for short-term safety, for that threat from without, like you're describing, like your therapist is saying, but it won't change anything. And then when you go back to something that is non-threatening, really, like what to buy, or less threatening, like what to buy, that's when you back off and you give it back to her. So it's okay. But this is not we're not doing this in a laboratory, and it's not. The reason that it's so difficult to answer questions like this, who's somebody who's done this much work, and you can tell that this person has done a lot of work and been working at it for a while, obviously, both from their self-report and from the way that they worded the question, is that there's no generic answer. There's no generic technique. There's no one way to approach things. The book that I'm writing on attachment therapy, right now, the working title is the method that's not a method. It's constant reevaluation. It's self-reflection. It's critical thinking. It's openness to, is my ego in this? It's open to, is this a fear response? And you're doing all of it. So yes, short answer, it's perfectly appropriate at times to take a hard line and give a simple answer like that to help somebody stay safe in the moment. And I will be very clear that immediate safety is necessary and important, but it won't solve the problem that she's getting in relationships with people and doesn't know herself. She is outsourcing her sense of self to him and to you at the same time. And so the work that you're doing in and around those specific examples, that's long-term, slow-moving, difficult and painful work, and you're also doing that. So I think you're right on track all the way around. Great question. Somebody writes, what is the therapeutic purpose of having kids earn a headlamp? It seems challenging enough in the wilderness. Why not provide them with the basics like light and then earn something that is more reward than a basic need? What is the therapeutic purpose of not allowing any comforts like maybe a sweatshirt from home or one personal item in their backpack? We have had personal items, and you can talk to the therapist about that as an option. That can be a possibility. The earning of the headlamp, first of all, it's not that hard for most students to get fires. It's really teaching them the law of the harvest. What you reap is what you sow. You don't have to teach farmers that lesson. Farmers know it inherently. But you have to teach modern children that lesson and find ways to teach it. And it has to be important enough for it to matter, but it can't result in safety issue or health issue. So the reason is to teach them to work, to teach them to earn things. And I think all of us parents, all the parents that are in this program can probably relate. If they can't relate, they can relate to their co-parent. We can relate to that idea that one of the pitfalls for so many of us is making it too easy for our children. I've done that a lot. I grew up poor. I grew up without a lot of things. I grew up wanting. And then I went to school, got a degree, and found a decent career, and my children don't experience poverty like I did. And I have overindulged them many times. And I'm going to share something very vulnerable with you, actually, because it's real. We're moving. I've already told you that. And we're downsizing. Part of it is I want to get ready for my retirement at some point. Not in the next year or 2 or 3, but someday I want to be ready for my retirement. And the home that we bought fits that plan better. So we're downsizing. We've had some nice houses. We've had some really nice houses. And my 15-year-old daughter today, September 5th, 2023, will tell you that she is more grateful for what she has today than when we had that house over there that was on an acre of land with a basketball court with lights, a trampoline, a pool house, and a jacuzzi with a waterfall. She's more grateful today than she was for that. Wilderness therapy strips away the luxuries. And really the answer, if I were answering the question with one word, it would be to teach them gratitude. And I don't mean in a autocratic, dominating way, but to teach them gratitude. Everybody knows that when you pay for your own bike, you don't leave it outside. So it's just teaching children the value of work, the value of things. And when I've already mentioned how we changed wilderness. we changed wilderness in the ways that you're describing. When we started our program, we gave all of our children internal frame packs, which means really nice backpacks. We made the food menu much more enjoyable. We had phone calls to parents that we thought that as a clinical reason, but at some point you want a carrot or two in this process, and a headlamp is where we've drawn the line. We could draw it somewhere else, but we feel like it makes its point really well. And if getting the 10 fires to get a headlamp were a really difficult process, I would feel differently about it. But the average student with effort could get a headlamp in a week. Just to give you some perspective. So it's just to teach them the value of things, to teach them gratitude. I remember I had a parent visit one time who worked for the State Department, and where they were stationed in China for a long time, and visited really, really poor villages in rural China. And when she visited us, she said, I saw something similar. I saw gratitude and happiness for the simple things that I don't see in urban environments where there's wealth and privilege. So it teaches us to not take things for granted. It teaches us mindfulness. It makes us more grateful. Now, it's also a pain in the butt for a teenager to have to work for something. And it's also a good thing to write in a letter to a parent to make it sound like the situation is dire. But especially in the summertime, especially right now, the sun is up for quite a long time, and very little happens at the end of the evening. And if they want a headlamp, they can get it. If they've been here, if your child has been here if you're a parent and your child has been here for more than a week, they could have a headlamp if they wanted to. But it does teach all those other things that I just mentioned. Thanks for asking it. It makes sense. I didn't understand the whole process when I started. Somebody writes, parents and others tell me that there are a lot of children struggling with anxiety and other mental health problems since the pandemic. For almost all of us, the pandemic was the most upsetting event of our lives. I was thinking about your frequent comment that children feel the need to take care of their parents' emotions. Could you speculate about how much the caretaking need may be contributing to the children's current mental health struggles versus the other upsets and uncertainties of the pandemic? It occurs to me that many of us adults can move on from the pandemic, but children may be stuck with persistent anxiety. I think you're so right. You know, during the pandemic and leading up to the pandemic, my children made it very clear that they didn't want to hear the news anymore. That it was stressing them out or overwhelming them. What's going on in the world is very stressful, and you know, the amount of fear coming from our media, our social media, is extraordinary, unprecedented. That's the most difficult thing about social media, is all the fear and rage and anger that the children are being asked to contain, that we didn't have to contain. I stopped watching the news about 3 years ago. I just realized that it wasn't good for my mental health. And I know that there's a balance about being informed on issues and mental health. But I found that where I operate, the change that I try to make in the world, that if I watch the kind of news that I was watching in 2016, 17, 18, 19, that I just couldn't function as well. So I think it's everything. I don't think it's one thing. But I will tell you this, I'm pretty optimistic about the world. One of my favorite quotes, it says that one thing that all of the mystics have in common, all of the great gurus have in common, is this sense that all is well. And I would argue to say that not many of us have that. My adult children were attending a group with other young therapists. I have a couple of children that are finishing up their PhDs, a daughter and her fiance that I'll refer to as my child at this point. And some of the other therapists were stating this idea that the world is a dark place right now, very pessimistic on the heels of the pandemic, global warming, politics, school shootings. It's out there, right? And my daughter and her fiance said, we don't feel this way. We don't feel doom and gloom. And the reason that my daughter and her fiance were saying this is because they protect themselves. They manage themselves. They manage what they put in to their head. But if you listen to the news and you scroll through social media, it's called doom scrolling. You might have heard of it. What you're doing is you're asked to be holding on to all of the world's tragedies at once. One of my favorite books that I've ever read is called Sapiens. One of the ideas that comes from that book is that we as human beings, genetically, were meant to deal with the tragedies and the dilemmas of our village, right? That's what our nervous systems are built for. Now, in 2023, we have unlimited information, unlimited access to news and to all the great tragedies and injustices all over the world. And we're exposed to that 24/7. And our nervous systems aren't faring well. And the pandemic exacerbated that because we were all stuck in front of screens more than ever. And we had very few outlets, and we weren't getting outside into nature. So I think it's all the things that you mentioned. And I think it is then incumbent upon us as individual people and parents to not consume so much fear and so much tragedy. For the people that can do that and maintain their mental health, I congratulate them. I envy them. I cannot. I have to gatekeep the amount of information, and I will not listen to somebody in the news and the media who is stoking fear and tragedy and bad news all the time. It just doesn't work for me. And I think social media makes it all the worse. So it's everything that you said. But that hope is not lost. We just have to change. As my 15-year-old daughter said to me a few months back, I've shared this with you. She said that she was talking to her therapist, and she said she realized that we, her mom and dad, are doing this for the first time. Which sounds kind of funny because she's our fourth child. And then she said, and then she followed it up by saying, and she's doing it for the first time, and we're all doing it for the first time. And she was showing some maturity and some forgiveness, if you will, for all of our humanity, some compassion for all of our humanity. And I thought about that a lot, what she said, and I realized no parent ever in the history of the world has ever parented before 2023 what we're going through. My first child, who's now 30 years old, it was a different world back then. My third child, who's 22, it was a different age back then when he was in high school. And of course, my second child. So we have to make different kinds of decisions. We have to figure out, I wrote about this a lot during the pandemic, that maybe we need social media distancing. Maybe we need to turn off the news. I even thought, at one point I thought, wouldn't it be nice if they started off the news with a meditation? If the first minute of the news was a breathing meditation. And then I realized that wouldn't work because number one, people would tune it off. It wouldn't sell. And number two, fear sells. Fear excites. Fear, it gives us energy, makes us feel alive. But it also over time causes a heck of a lot of trauma in our nervous system. So everything you're saying is a part of it. Somebody writes, my son just turned 19 and has decided not to go to college or trade school. Since his friends have gone to college, we have noticed him reacting strongly over small things. For example, flipping out and debasing his mother because she was consolidating hot sauce. Today, she turned his grilled cheese over since he went to another room and it was burning. He justifies his actions says his mother needs to be accountable. We have been back and forth on him leaving. After today, we think he uses his mother as an emotional punching bag. We think he might be accountable if he can't blame her for his mistakes. Can this happen? Can he learn accountability? He is adopted and seems to transfer his dislike of his birth mother to his mother, but also blames everyone for his mistakes. He threw the skillet on the ground today and blamed his grilled cheese for burning while he watched the other half on his mother. Maybe it's through the other half. The best thing from this question that I'll take, it's really important that you all take care of yourselves. It's really important that you take care of yourself in the context that when you do so, that you let other people down. That you disappoint people. That you drop balls. That you fail. It's really important that you put yourself a priority, and that might be, I think, is the building block for teaching your child accountability. You have to be willing to face guilt. That's the secret. You have to walk through guilt and shame. Because if you capitulate to guilt for fear that your child might feel X, Y, or Z, or think of you X, Y, or Z way, or get mad at you, or get disappointed in you, or say you're a bad parent, or you'll even think you're a bad parent without them telling you you're a bad parent. And then you're failing just like your parents did, on and on and on. Then you don't remain true to yourself. Then you caretake or enable. And you're really serving your ego, which is to say, you're not really working through guilt. And then your children don't get seen. They don't get heard. Because you're not really seeing and hearing them when you're capitulating. You're feeding your ego of being the good parent. So it's really important, mom and dad, really important that you fail, that you flop, that you let people down, that you drop balls, that you become the villain in your child's story at some point. And I'm not talking about being cruel or unkind on purpose. I'm not talking about lashing out at them or ignoring them. I'm talking about the big shift. This is the grand answer to the question. The big shift is from trying to parent to control how your child grows up, shape them up, manage them up, create them to be what you think they need to be, all well intended, of course. Not really, but that's what we think. To shift from that to, I have to love and take care of myself first. I have to secure my own mask first, like on the airplane. And I'm going to parent. I'm going to be in relationships with one foot always in what do I need in this situation to feel okay. Now, I know that parenting is a selfless task in so many ways. I know that I have never sacrificed more for anybody, even close to as much as I've sacrificed for my children. And that's true of most parents who love parenting and love their children. That's just a fact. So I know that that's true. But codependency is the illusion that you're taking care of somebody else when you're really taking care of yourself. My daughter said that. Emma Reedy. That's her quote. Codependency is the illusion that you're taking care of them when you're really taking care of yourself. And if you don't take care of yourself, you will steal from them. People who aspire to be selfless constantly rob other people and steal from other people and have no idea how much they're taking. And that's the wound. That's the narcissistic injury that children are suffering from. So a really important question in recovery from codependency is, what do I need in this situation? Are my needs adequately attended to by me? And am I willing to face, because there's really two doors out of the locked room that you're in. There's two doors. One of them leads to anger and resentment, and one of them leads to guilt. You can get through guilt. You can learn to cope with guilt. You can learn to unlearn guilt. You can learn to reprogram yourself around guilt. The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner is a great book that explains this. A mother with an aging father says, I realize that if I don't start saying no to my father, she said, if I don't start saying no to my father, I'm going to feel angry and resentful. But if I do say no to my father and set boundaries, I'm going to feel guilty. And so she concludes, so I'm going to have to learn to tolerate the guilt for a while. And that's really what we're up against. All right. That was a very fast hour. I think that's all the questions anyway, and we're up against the hour. All right, folks. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, this is the best thing you can do for your child. For your child. Finding you. As I've been mentioning on a lot of the other episodes, if you don't want to go to Evoke, if you're worried about it being a product that we're selling, go to Onsite. Go to the Meadows Survivor Program. Go to the House at Ocala. Go to Karen Breakthrough. Those are all other programs. Go somewhere. Do your own work. Unravel your own trauma. Look at your own childhood. September 20th through 24th, we have one spot left. And it will fill up. September 20th through 24th is the next offering. We also have an online offering that is a third of the cost and half of the time, September 15th through 17th. And we just added another Returning to You. So the sequel to Finding You, and I always run the Returning to You, the sequel to Finding You is March 6th through 10th. I'll be running that one. The October 25th through 29th is already full. And we also are announcing a new program. This will be our second. I'm going to do a couples, Finding Connection workshop. So that's 4 couples, maximum of 4 couples, February 7th through 11th. Again, I'll be running that one. We have custom Finding Connection intensives for couples and co-parents. And Finding Family workshops for families. Those are all customized, individualized contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups for current and alumni families. The next one is September 7th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. September 26th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering for that. And then once a month, we have an alumni meeting for our intensives alumni. September 12th at 6 p.m. is the next offering for that. Go to evoketherapy.com/family-involvement for more information on those. If you want to do a mid-program visit, multi-day visit, you want to have some of the experience that your child has and be immersed in the process, family treks are that option. 3 to 4 days, 2 to 3 nights. You can do it at the beginning of you can do it in the middle of the program. You can do it at the end of the program. You can even do that if your child didn't go to Evoke or if your child is leaving another program. If you just want an immersive experience out in the wilderness using nature along with therapy, contact admissions at evoketherapy.com to find out about our family treks or talk to your child's therapist. We offer coaching services. These are virtual sessions for parents, couples, families, or individuals navigating anything in life that they want to be that they might need support with. Clarifying boundaries, communication skill building. Really, we focus on transitioning home if that's a desire for you. But it really can relate to anything that you might need coaching or support with. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current families to try at least 6. These are free. 6 of the following 12-step support groups, or any combination of them, up to 6. Al-Anon.org, Coda.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org for a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power, if that's a sticking point for you, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local communities. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You in Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search for Finding You there. You can also watch the rebroadcast of these on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find me, Dr. Brad Reedy, and Evoke Therapy Programs on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy or @DrBradReedy. Evoke Intensives is on Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapyIntensives. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. If you want to give back and donate for people that can't afford treatment, the 3 charitable partners that we work with and contribute to are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. Your tax-deductible donation can be earmarked for a specific program or a specific population, if that be your heart's desire. All right, folks, my next broadcast will be in about 48 hours. September 7th at 6 p.m., I'll be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder in all of its variations and all of its circumstances. So look forward to that. 6 p.m. this Thursday night at, excuse me, September 7th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, PTSD. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I hope this gives you some support. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.